Hi, my name is Andre Kearns, and the title of my session is Helping African Americans Trace to Slaveholding Ancestors Using DNA. Thanks for this opportunity to share this talk with you. Here are the topics that I'll cover. I'll start with a family history question. I'll then share my approach as a genealogist to answer this question. I'll then apply my approach to uncover slaveholding ancestry. And then I'll share some reflections on the meaning of family and reconciliation. Was Master Smyre of Lincolnton, North Carolina, my ancestor? Good research starts with a good question, and this was mine. My third great grandfather, Henry Johnston, whom I'm related to through my own father, was born enslaved in North Carolina sometime in the 1840s. Now, family oral history identifies his father only as Master Smyre. Who was this man? Was this true? And how could I be sure? And why would I even want to know? African Americans face many challenges in advancing our family histories. One key challenge is successfully tracing back to slaveholding ancestors. Many African Americans have European ancestry, dating back to the times of slavery, which is the result of offspring between white men and enslaved women. And lack of documentation has traditionally made it very difficult to trace these connections. But DNA testing offers African Americans new possibilities to discover and validate these relationships. And so in this session, I'll share how I used extensive DNA testing to validate that Henry Johnston was the son of a slave-owning Smyre who immigrated from Germany to North Carolina in the 18th century. Why search for slaveholding ancestors as African American researchers? This is a very good question. Tracing back to slaveholding ancestors will reveal to the researcher, to the African American researcher, a very painful history of slavery and rape. And when I uncover this history in my own family through my research, it makes me feel very sad and angry when I first uncover it. Now, with this said, there are three reasons why I search for slaveholding ancestors within my family research. Number one is my goal is to uncover my complete family history, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And so I don't want to pick and choose what part of my family history that I want to uncover. I want to cover all of it as much as I possibly can. And that leads me to my second point, which is I want to do that so that I can document our entire family history as complete as I can possibly uncover it for future generations. And my motivation is I want to preserve their choice to know their family history. If they choose not to know it, that's fine. But if there are future generations that do want to know this family history, I want to make sure I document it so that it's available to them. And then third, I want to make sure that I uncover these stories because, yes, when I initially uncover them, these stories of my enslaved ancestors, they do make me sad and angry. But over time, I actually grow inspired by them. I source inspiration from these stories. The notion that my enslaved ancestors were so strong that they endured slavery and that they persevered beyond their circumstance to make a better way and a better life for themselves and for future generations that lead all the way to me. So, how have I done it? How have I researched my enslaved ancestors? How have I researched my slaveholding ancestors? My approach has 4 steps. My research approach really has 4 steps. Number one is create a family tree, and you can do that the old-fashioned way with pen and paper, or you can use family tree software, or you can use online services like Ancestry.com. Step 2, talk with your family members. Talk with your parents, your grandparents, all the elders in the family. Gather family names, dates, locations, and family stories. And then also, as far as this session is concerned, make sure that you gather names of slave owners, people who may have owned your family members, because these will be important clues to follow to identify slaveholding ancestors. Step 3, extend your family history with traditional genealogical research, census records. And remember, for formerly enslaved people, they first appear in the census in 1870. Marriage records, death records, and then for slave owners who may have owned your family members in particular, look at wills, probate records, and deeds. All right. I found all of these documents very helpful in uncovering slaveholder ancestry. And then finally, discover with DNA testing. As African Americans, one of the key challenges that we face is lack of documentation about our family history due to slavery. But with the power of DNA technology, we are able to tap into documentation that's etched in our own DNA in order to advance our research. And so use these 4 steps to stay focused and organized in order to advance your family research. So now let's apply this approach to identify Master Smyre and whether or not he's my ancestor. So step 1, creating a family tree. Here is my Kearns family tree, which I've created on Ancestry, and I've been building it since 2006. This is what's called a pedigree view of my tree. So it starts with my kids, and I work my way back all the way to my great-grandparents. And so let's focus on my great-grandfather, Andre Kearns, and he is the grandson of Henry Johnston. So let's focus on extending his family tree back. Step 2, talk with family members. So according to family history, Andre Kearns, my great-grandfather, his mother was named Anna Augusta Kearns. So that would make her my great-great-grandmother. And so here's her gravestone in the Kearns family cemetery in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. And so as you can see from her gravestone, she was born in 1868, 3 years after the end of slavery, and she died in 1937. So now with this family oral history, I've been able to push my ancestry back to my great-great-grandmother, Augusta Kearns. That's what she was known as. And so let's keep pushing back. Step 3, extend with genealogical research. So I found this marriage record for my great-great-grandmother, Augusta Kearns, and it says that she married my great-great-grandfather. His name was Gus Kearns. And so, and they were married in Mecklenburg County, North Carolina. And this marriage record reveals a couple things. It reveals that Augusta's last name, her maiden name, was Johnston, and that her father's name was Henry Johnston. So now with this marriage record, I've been able to push my ancestry back another generation to my 3rd great-grandfather, Henry Johnston. Now let's explore Henry Johnston a bit more. Here's an 1870 census record for Henry Johnston. Now remember, 1870 is the first census in which formerly enslaved people like Henry appear in the census. And so the clue that I wanted to grab onto from this census record is his age. And his age is listed as 22. And so that means that he was born around 1848. So let's take that clue and let's keep searching. So let's return to my original research question. Was Master Smyre the father of Henry Johnston? So to start to research this, I'm going to rely on a clue that was shared with me as part of the family oral history. And that was that Master Smyre was from Lincolnton, North Carolina. Now, Lincolnton is located in a place called Lincoln County, North Carolina. And so you see the map here of North Carolina counties, and you see Lincoln County there marked with a red dot. What I want to point out is a couple things. One, if you look east of Lincoln to Mecklenburg County, you see that Mecklenburg sits right next to Lincoln. And so you can imagine the scenario where Henry Johnston is enslaved, perhaps in Lincoln County. And then in 1865, he's emancipated at the end of the Civil War. And he chooses to leave Lincoln County and move to Mecklenburg County, where he starts his new life and a new family as a free man. The other thing I want to point out is directly above Lincoln County sits Catawba County. And Catawba County was actually formed from Lincoln County in 1842. So as we're looking for slave-owning Smyres, we're going to look at both Lincoln County and then also Catawba County. So what I was able to discover was that the Smyres of Lincoln County trace back to a couple named John and Matilda Bost Smyre. And so here is a 1830 census record for their household. And so this census confirms one thing that's very important, which is that they were slave owners. And so note that there were 4 enslaved people in the house. Now, we know from the 1870 census that Henry Johnston was born probably around 1848. So he would not have been in this house. He wouldn't have been born. But this at least establishes that the Smyres were slave owners. And so now what I want to do is look at slave records dated after Henry was born, so 1850s and 1860s, to see if I can find clues to locate where who might have owned Henry. So in 1850 and 1860, the U.S. published census slave schedules. So right here, we're looking at the 1860 census slave schedule for the children of John and Matilda Smyre, who are slave owners. So that would be John, Daniel, Elias, and George Smyre. And so these slave schedules were population schedules, and they didn't list the name of enslaved people. They simply listed that enslaved person's sex, their age, and then also their racial designation, whether they were black or mixed race. And so we're looking for enslaved males in the age range of Henry Johnston. And so unfortunately, what we see here is that there are enslaved males in the age range, give or take 10 years from Henry Johnston's birth year, estimated birth year, that could be him, right? And so unfortunately, this doesn't help me really to narrow down to a particular son of John and Matilda Smyre, who could be the owner and father of Henry Johnston. One thing to note, though, is that's interesting. John Smyre Jr. only owns one enslaved person, and it's a male whose estimated birth year is about 12 years before the birth of Henry Johnston. So it's possible that this could be Henry. It's in a general age range of Henry, but we need more information. So the search continues. Next, I did extensive searches of wills, deeds, and probate records, looking for the name Henry as an enslaved boy. And so all of these records are online, available on Family Search. And so I was looking at wills, which articulate how a person wants their estate to be distributed upon their death. I looked at probates, which articulates and documents how a person's estate is actually distributed after they've died. And then I looked at deeds, which records property transactions, buying and selling of property. And in this case, it would include enslaved persons for a given person. And so I searched those documents across the Smyre family, and I came up empty. And so this is a great example of why researching enslaved ancestry is so incredibly difficult. It felt like I was looking for a needle in a haystack, and I couldn't find what I was looking for. But the good thing, or the promising thing, is there's this thing called DNA. Again, where our connections are documented and etched in our DNA. And so I decided that I'd hit this brick wall. And so now it's time to look at DNA to see if that could help me advance my research and answer the question I was looking to answer. So first I leveraged autosomal DNA testing. And my strategy was to test myself and to test my family members and analyze our matches for Smyre descendants. And so you see photos of myself on the far left, and then my father, and then my paternal grand aunt, who is my paternal grandfather's younger sister, and then you see my Kearns cousin, with whom I share Augusta Johnson Kearns as a common ancestor, and then on the far right you see my Johnston cousin, with whom I share Henry Johnston as a common ancestor. And so we all tested on Ancestry DNA, and I analyzed our results, and I found a distinct pattern. All of us had a large volume of DNA matches to Smyre direct descendants. So I had over 100 DNA matches to Smyre descendants. My dad had over 100 matches to Smyre descendants. My grand aunt had over 200 matches to Smyre descendants. My Kearns cousin had over 100 matches to Smyre descendants. And then my Johnston cousin had over 200 matches to Smyre descendants. And then the other thing I noticed was we generated the most matches with descendants of John Smyre Jr., the son of John and Matilda Smyre. So again, I think this builds a case that we do have a DNA connection to the Smyre family. It gives us a clue that John Smyre Jr. may be the father of Henry, but we don't know for sure. So these are great clues, and so let's continue. So to be even more certain, I did another form of DNA testing, which is Y-DNA testing, and I did that with family tree DNA. And note that only men can take Y-DNA testing because you have to have a Y chromosome to take this form of test. And remember, Y-DNA testing helps you to trace your direct paternal ancestry, so your father's 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 father going back many generations. And so this is a photo of me with my cousin Greg Johnston, and we're meeting for the first time at a Starbucks. And Greg is a direct paternal descendant of Henry Johnston. I couldn't do the Y-DNA test because I'm not a direct paternal descendant of Henry Johnston, but he could. And so we connected to the Starbucks, and I introduced myself. I shared our Johnston family history. I shared the research I was working on, and I asked him, as a direct paternal descendant of Henry Johnston, whether he'd be willing to test to see if we were Smyre descendants, and he said, sure. So, drum roll, please. Here are his results. Here's cousin Greg's results. His top matches were Smyre, Smyres, and Smyre. And those first two matches at the genetic distance of 0, Smyre and Smyres, they are both direct descendants of John Smyre Jr. And what we also found was that Greg's haplogroup was JM172 with origins in Germany. And so when I saw these results, I was very excited that I was finally able to validate that we indeed descended from the Smyres. Between the Y-DNA testing and the autosomal testing, the DNA evidence was clear. But what this didn't help me to answer definitively was which son of John and Matilda Smyre we descended from. Which son was the father of my third great grandfather, Henry Johnston. And then I caught a break. I went back to the records and searching my records, and I found this marriage record for Henry Johnston, dated 1867. And this marriage record from Mecklenburg County lists his parents as John and Millie Smyre. And of course, Smyre is really Smyre. So his parents are John and Millie Smyre. And the name Millie triggered a memory of something that I'd seen before as I reviewed Smyre family wills, probate records, and deeds. And so I went back to the will of Jacob Shuford, who is the father-in-law to John Smyre Jr. And I found this passage in the will. It says, I give and bequeath to my daughter Elizabeth Smyre for life a Negro woman named Millie and her increases, and also a Negro boy named Perry, now in the possession of my son-in-law, John Smyre. So there it was. This was the evidence that Millie, an enslaved woman named Millie, was owned by John Smyre Jr. And that, coupled with Henry Johnston's marriage record, seals it. His father was John Smyre Jr., slave owner, and his mother was an enslaved woman named Millie. And so back to my original question, was Master Smyre of Lincolnton, North Carolina, my ancestor? The answer is definitively yes. My fourth great grandfather was John Smyre Jr. And so next I started researching Smyre family history. And a lot of what I uncovered about the Smyre family, I discovered in this book called John Smyre, Plain Dutch Pioneer by my cousin Ian Smyre. And so I learned that John Smyre Jr. was the oldest son of John and Matilda Smyre. I learned that the Smyres lived on the eastern bank of the Catawba River near Lincolnton. I learned that John Smyre Jr. was German, so he was likely a Palatine, which is an early 18th century immigrant from the Middle Rhine region, which is modern-day Germany, and that John Sr. was a man of many talents and professions. I even discovered that through this book that he was a Revolutionary War patriot. But it's also important to note in the historical record that he was a slave owner. Connecting with my Smyre descendant DNA matches and their family members. This is an experience that has really enriched my life. And I will say my experiences have been nothing but positive. It's been exciting and amazing to connect with new family members and to know that I have this expanded family. And so we've had open conversations on a range of topics. And the topics surrounding our shared ancestry can sometimes be difficult to discuss. But here are some of the reflections I had on the discussions that I had with my newfound family members based on this experience of connecting with them. One is that finding common language with my Smyre cousins to discuss family history and slavery, I found that sometimes that was challenging. For example, it had been passed down to me that the Smyres had a plantation. It had been passed down to my Smyre cousins that they had a family farm. It had become clear to me through my research that the Smyres owned a number of enslaved people. It was their view that they were not aware that the Smyres had owned enslaved people. They did acknowledge that perhaps they had owned one or two enslaved people, but those folks were as close as family members. And so as part of these discussions, I did the best that I could to challenge them to accept the true and objective history of the Smyres as slave owners. And also through these interactions, they allowed me to challenge myself on whether I was ready to explore and interested in exploring my German ancestry, particularly knowing the circumstances from which this ancestry was sourced for me. But at the end of the day, it was all very positive. The dialogue continues, and I'm hoping that post COVID, that I'll be able to take a pilgrimage to Lincoln County and to Catawba County and learn more about my Smyre ancestors, but most importantly, so that I can pay tribute to my enslaved ancestors, Henry Johnston and Millie, his mother Millie. And so here's a summary I'd like to leave with you. 3 points. One is all good research starts with a good research question. And then point number 2, apply a 4-step approach to advance your research. by creating a family tree, talking with family members, extending your family history with genealogical research, and then using the power of DNA testing to discover your family history. And make sure you stay persistent. You're going to hit brick walls, you're going to hit roadblocks, you're going to hit challenges. But if you stay persistent and creative and systematic and focused, you will find ways to break down those brick walls and address those challenges so that you can unlock your true family history. And so with that, I'd like to say thank you. And I hope you found this presentation both interesting and helpful. And so I want to leave you with my email address. And then also I publish a blog on medium.com at Andre Kearns. So if you're interested in checking that out, please do so. And thank you so much.